Mara Andrada wrote the letter in a single breath, though it felt like she exhaled 15 years. She sat at the kitchen table of the coastal cottage she and Santiago had once painted coral red, the salt-blind window cracked open to the restless Atlantic. Outside, dusk rolled violet, the color of bruises that never reach skin. Dearest Santi, she had begun, then crossed out the intimate diminutive, rewriting simply Santiago. She filled 4 pages, apologies too late, accounts never balanced, the tender postscript she would never confess aloud. I loved you, even when you couldn't see it. When the pen lifted, Mara stared at the scrawl, as if it were a map to a country already swallowed by the sea. She should burn it, perhaps, or hide it in the cedar box with the dried gardenias. Instead, an old memory tugged. Santiago's boyish delight in folding paper boats, launching them into the estuary behind their university dorm, betting whose craft would endure longest before it waterlogged and sank. She could still hear how he'd whooped at every unlikely survivor. Mara rose, smoothing the bruised purple skirt she wore to her own farewell party. Neighbors assumed she was relocating to the city, unaware fleeing felt closer to truth. She took the letter to the small work table by the window. Line by line, she performed the origami Santiago had taught. Valley fold, mountain fold, tucking corners like secrets. Inked words vanished into crisp seams until the document was only shape, not confession. One last crease, and a boat emerged, its pointed prow delicate as a prayer. She carried it to the shore at moonrise. The tide skittered like silver moths across sand. Mara crouched, placed the boat upon the breathing edge of water, and, because no one else heard, whispered, "Goodbye." Then she turned and walked back up the dunes, never looking over her shoulder to watch if the tide ate the paper, never wondering whether paper armor could survive salt. She believed it would soak, sag, and finally dissolve before dawn. That seemed fitting. But at the first lick of brine, the letter boat learned it had a name. Santiago, written in black ink, was folded inside its hull more than a dozen times. The other words pressed against each other like passengers in a hold. The paper quivered. I will not sink, it decided, though it didn't yet know why. A gull circled overhead, curious. You're made of land words, it cawed, bemused. Sea swallows land, not tonight, said the boat, though it possessed no mouth. It puffed its paper angles into taut wings, shedding droplets the way a dog shakes off rain. The receding wave pulled the tiny vessel into deeper water, and instead of capsizing, it skimmed forward, catching the current like a surfboard. Thus began a voyage no farewell letter had ever intended. 1. The River of Eels. The estuary accepted the boat as something both alien and beloved. Beneath, ribbons of glassy eels migrated toward the Sargasso. One eel, translucent as a ghost, nudged the hull. You're leaking midnight, it hissed. For the ink that spelled heartbreak bled faintly under the laminated moon. I carry a human ache, said the boat, but I refuse to sink before I reach somewhere. Where is somewhere? The eel asked. The boat had no coordinates, only ache. Back, it said at last, though it floated forward. Eels are kind to travelers who do not know their destinations. They have swum blind for millennia. Had they not, the school formed a living slipstream that bore the boat faster, away from darting mullets, past the brackish threshold where river becomes sea. When dawn bruised the horizon, the eel spoke again. We cannot journey farther with you. Warm currents call us home. Remember, what is forgotten by tongues may be remembered by fins. The boat bobbed, gratitude, then ventured alone into the Atlantic. Behind it, shoreline dwindled into a line of smudged charcoal. Mara's cottage was invisible beyond that, yet the boat felt the pull of her heartbeat like distant thunder. 2. The storm that stole nothing. On the 10th night, clouds assembled like infantry. Lightning embroidered the sky, thunder hammered, waves reared higher than cathedrals, white manes foaming. Other flotsam palm trunks, plastic crates whirled and cracked apart. The paper boat weighed less than a sparrow's rib. Yet each deluge rolled harmlessly off its lacquer of resolve. A sodden gull, wings spent, crash-landed nearby. It clutched a torn scrap of newspaper in its beak. War escalates, the headline screamed, before disintegrating. The gull flailed on a crest. Climb aboard, the boat offered, though its deck was scarcely larger than a man's palm. The gull obeyed, shrinking its body, For creatures in dreams obey different physics. It perched mast-like on the central fold. Bolstered by this ridiculous alliance, the boat surfed storm walls, nose angled into wind. Every gust should have shredded cellulose, yet the letter's ink wove invisible fibers of longing and regret, steel strong. Paper, reinforced by emotion, became more stubborn than ironwood. At dawn, the sea calmed, embarrassed by its tantrum. The gull shook droplets from its matted feathers. "Why do you persist?" it croaked. "Storms eat sturdier ships." "I promised. Without knowing I promised," the boat replied. "Someone needs what I carry." "What is it that you carry?" "Closure," said the boat, "and courage." The gull eyed the horizon, where tropical pinks bloomed. "Are those heavier than water?" "Infinitely," said the boat, "yet they float." 3. The archipelago of lost things, weeks blurred. The boat sailed through the archipelago where currents deposit what the world misplaces. Single gloves, boarded up message bottles, sneakers whose owners learned to walk again. On an eerily calm midday, the boat snagged beside a rocky islet no larger than a dining table. There lay a rusted mailbox planted into the stone like a flagpole. Its door hung open, stuffed with letters addressed to recipients who'd vanished before postage was invented. The boat felt kinship and sorrow. It grazed the mailbox, allowing barnacles to read it with their feathery Siri. They tickled over the crease that hid Mara's final confession. "I loved you even when you couldn't see it." Barnacles clicked among themselves, a gossip choir. "This sentence is still warm," they decided. "Someone still waits." They pried a scale of calcium from their own shells, pressed it against the boat's prow as a figurehead. "For safe return," they chorused. Thus armored with barnacle blessing, the boat glided away, leaving the mailbox to its rusted vigil. 4. The whale, who sang in Rowan's farther on, a humpback breached, trailing tattered fishing net like an unwanted cloak. The boat sailed into the shadow of that magnificent body. "I carry a song I can't finish," the whale moaned thunderously. Humans had woven plastic strands around its flukes. Each stroke through water tasted of pain. "Unknot your burden onto me," said the boat. It pressed its paper point into a loose net loop, sawing gently until a strand frayed. Tiny tears opened in the letter's margin, but the boat insisted. The whale flexed, the net slipped, one by one lines snapped until the animal was free. The whale dove, then breached again in joy, raining seawater. The paper hull drank faint streaks of whale song that no human ear would decipher. "Courage," the notes translated. "You dare more lightly than stone." 5. The Mirror Sea, 78 days after launch, though the boat in its new timelessness no longer tallied ocean surface, turned to polished obsidian. Stars reflected so perfectly that sky and sea were indistinguishable. The world became infinite above and below. In that mirror, the boat glimpsed itself for the first time. Crinkled, yes, edges salt stiff. Some ink had feathered, but words remained readable to any who knew the language of heartbreak. It also noticed the barnacle figurehead glowing pearl white, and the tiny feather the gull had left behind, and filaments of whale song woven through its seams. The boat understood it was no longer merely Mara's farewell. It was a vessel of many gifts exchanged during passage, a reliquary of oceanic kindness. Wind hushed to a breath. There was no forward movement. The boat contemplated stillness so vast that even loneliness dissolved. It imagined what Mara felt that night she folded it, her heartbeat like trapped wings, uncertainty gnawing her. The boat understood suddenly that closure was not a weight to deliver, but a door to open. Yet how to find her? The answer arrived in the shape of the moon. Its reflection formed a luminous road on the Mirror Sea. The boat aligned its prow to that silver lane and slid forward, though no wind propelled it. Perhaps longing itself generated breeze. 6. The ghost lighthouse soon. The dark silhouette of a lighthouse materialized atop a lonely sea stack. Windows burnt with spectral light, though no keeper dwelt inside. The boat minute circled the base, scanning. At last, it found stone steps chiseled into rock. An impossible thought seized it: go up. It drifted to the final submerged step. Using gravity in reverse, the boat breached the water and tipped itself upward, climbing as if the laws of material world were merely suggestions. Each bounce up a step dried the paper a bit, tightened the ink again. At the top platform, lantern glass lay shattered. Among shards stood a brass compass, needle spinning lazily. "Compass?" asked the boat. "Point home." The needle steadied, quivering toward northwest, the direction of Mara's coastline. Then, as if its duty complete, the compass collapsed into verdigris dust that wind whisked away. The boat bowed to absent keepers, tumbled back down steps, and landed on water with barely a ripple. The path was set. 7. The great circle during the long crossing, seasons whirred overhead, constellations wheeled, gales chafed crests into manic sculpture. The boat, though thinned by sun, never leaked. Albatross escorted it across latitudes, whispering gossip of icebergs and oil slicks. A bluefin tuna, older than Revolutionary Wars, swam sentinel beneath for 3 weeks, certain the paper must be magical because it refused to become soup. At the 121st dawn, land fumes reached the boat, peat smoke, lavender, diesel, humanity. It recognized the color of sky Mara used to paint, the gull dialect specific to her harbor. Its hull fluttered like nervous ribs, a river mouth opened, welcoming. Tides reversed their usual hunger, pushing the vessel inland. Reeds bent, dragonflies flitted a skirt. Children on a rickety wharf spotted the miracle. Look, a little boat. Their nets tried scooping it, but the boat zigged elegantly away. It had one passenger still to reach. 8. The cottage of coral, red dusk again, the same violet bruise. Mara sat on her porch steps, suitcases lined behind her. The taxi would arrive soon. She had postponed departure all day, caught in that paralyzing cusp where leaving becomes more impossible than staying. She fingered the outline of a key in her pocket, the cottage deed already transferred to a cousin. The horizon reflected crimson, as if the sun bled itself empty. Something nudged the shore, a papery rustle among pebbles. Mara rose, curiosity warring with fatigue. She approached and found, lodged perfectly between her boots, a tiny boat. The paper was sun-whitened and salt-stained, but legible. She inhaled. Ink smelled faintly of eucalyptus soap used in the old dormitory showers. Hands shaking, Mara unfolded the boat, seam by seam. As creases lifted, the page softened until it lay flat. Her own handwriting staring back. The confession remained, but additional markings decorated margins. Delicate barnacle traces forming constellations, a pale blue streak that tasted, when she touched tongue to it, of whale breath. One downy feather adhered beside the valediction. In the lower corner, a sentence she never wrote shimmered in unfamiliar script. Closure is only a harbor, courage is the ocean. Tears blurred the lines. Beyond her, tide sighed, neither pleading nor retreating. Mara read the letter twice, then closed her eyes. The central ache that had driven her to run no longer dominated her chest. It was present, yes, but surrounded by something vaster. A sense she belonged to a story that reached farther than personal sorrow. When she opened her eyes, the taxi headlights flickered down the lane. Mara folded the page again, this time not into a boat, but into a square she tucked over her heart inside her blouse. She turned, walked to the taxi, and surprised herself by giving the driver a new destination. Not the train station, but the hospital 3 towns north, where she knew Santiago recovered from surgery he had not wanted her to know about. They had parted in anger. She had feared seeing him would reopen old wounds, but the paper had traveled the planet to give her spine. The driver nodded without question. Vera glanced back once. Moonlit waves lapped at her footprints, erasing them gently, permission to start again. 9. A brief epilogue, told by gulls. At first light, gulls swooped over the tide line, fishing for breakfast gossip. They noticed a flattened patch of sand where a boat had rested. Did it sink at last, one asked. No, said another who had once ridden a storm atop that very vessel. It simply arrived. The gull opened its beak, and a single word fell out, so soft the breeze almost kept it home, and that was enough.